With Konami's newest Alice in Wonderland archetype, Maliss, making waves in the metagame. Players have been looking for assistance against this matchup, so we will be going down the rabbit hole to discover choice cards to be utilizing against this deck. Because in today's video, we're going to be going over how to beat Maliss. And now Maliss is the latest Cyberse deck that Konami has released, and much like all the other Cyberse archetypes, Maliss does lock you into only special summoning link monsters from the extra deck. We're seeing that they are actually splashable in a variety of decks, and that is because the primary effect that all of the Maliss creatures have is that once they are banished, you can pay a set amount of life points to special summon them back. And then not only that, but all the Maliss monsters do have effects whenever they're summoned, whether that's banishing other monsters from the deck, or being able to draw two by banishing a Maliss from the hand, as well as setting a variety of the Maliss traps directly from the deck. A majority of what the deck does is summon out big boss monsters, control the field, as well as stacking a bunch of attack onto their links and swinging for game. And now while the Maliss combo line can be rather complex, beating it is rather simple. And the best card to beat the Maliss deck is Artifact Lancia. And now, Artifact Lancia has been floating around for quite some time, and we see over in the OCG, almost every deck is side decking Lancia, and that is for Maliss. And that is because during your opponent's turn, you contribute this card from your hand or face up field, and then for the duration of the turn, neither player can banish cards. And now, since the entire Maliss deck is about banishing cards, Artifact Lancia is the #1 card in player side decks outside of Dimensional Barrier against Yugioh. And not only that, but we see over in the OCG that Scythe is still legal, so this is even spurring some players to utilize Artifact Sanctum so that on their very first turn they can go into a Lancia or a Scythe. But over in the TCG, obviously we don't have the Scythe, so having that Artifact Sanctum just for the Lancia is actually going to be something that some players do go for. And now following suit with the Artifact Lancia is the Queen of Control, and that is Chaos Hunter. And now you can special summon Chaos Hunter by discarding a card when your opponent special summons, and then as long as Chaos Hunter is on the field, your opponent cannot banish cards. And now I want to note, unlike Lancia, Chaos Hunter states that only your opponent cannot banish cards. So to the Maliss players out there that want to have a side deck option that doesn't hurt their deck, Chaos Hunter is a card that you can utilize as well. And now getting into some ways to floodgate the Maliss deck out of existence, we get into one of the main floodgates to use against them, and that is Imperial Iron Wall. Preventing them from banishing cards at all is the #1 option against the deck. So if you are able to combo off, flip up Imperial Iron Wall on their turn, and then just see them crash and burn, Imperial Iron Wall will be one of the main go-tos against the Maliss match. And now following suit is another continuous trap that will shut down their deck, and that is Soul Drain. And that is because at the cost of 1,000 life points, monsters that are banished, as well as monsters that are in the graveyard, cannot activate their effects. So if you're unable to use cards like Imperial Iron Wall, perhaps you have to banish cards yourselves or your effects do, Soul Drain is an amazing option as well against the Maliss matchup. Now sticking with the drains, if you want to go full menace against the Maliss, you can always utilize Skill Drain. And now with the Skill Drain, even if they're able to summon all their Maliss monsters out, they're still not going to be looking good, and their best option would have to be utilizing the beatdown from their field spell. But one of the best ways to lock the Maliss deck down is there can only be one. Again, since it is a Cyberse deck, all the monsters are pretty much Cyberse monsters. Once you flip up this card and they only have one Cyberse Maliss on the board, they won't be able to link climb, summon additional monsters. Even if they have a Cyberse link, they're still locked out of other Cyberse types. So there can be only one will be a popular choice against the Maliss matchup. And now the last continuous trap we're going to be mentioning is because they're all darks, we have to mention Shadow Imprisoning Mare. And I know this isn't one of the most popular options, but is one I wanted to cover because given you negate the effects of all darks on the field and in the grave, some players might feel the need to utilize this against the Maliss as well. But one of the surefire cards to use against the Maliss deck is a card that Labyrinth players love, and that is Destructive Daruma Karma Cannon. And now that is because you flip all their monsters into face down defense position, and then anything that can't be flipped, if something was, are banished. So all their monsters flipped face down, links removed from the board, and this will shut them out of the combo right then and there. And then one of the latest traps to be seeing play, especially in the Yugioh deck for them to use off Rafflesia, is Gravedigger's Trap Hole. And that is because when your opponent activates a monster effect from the graveyard or the banished, you can actually negate the effect and then burn them for 2000 damage. And now one of the most popular floodgates that we've been seeing in a bunch of side decks is deck lockdown. This does prevent the opponent from summoning from the extra deck or adding, and I want to note this isn't an end-all be-all versus Maliss, because a lot of times they banish from the deck, but with cards like Signet Mining as well as a few other tech choices, this will prevent them from adding consistently from the deck to the hand. But since your opponent is summoning multiple times and we want to shut that down, we have the field spell Summon Breaker, and that is because during the main phase, if the turn player successfully conducts the third summon of a monster, it becomes the end phase. And as we note that the Maliss deck summons well over 3 times, so unless they do it in the main phase too, their turn will end. But if you want to encourage your opponent to summon, well, maybe not so much. Definitely consider the field spell Extra Net, and that is because anytime your opponent special summons from their extra deck, you draw 1 card. But as we know, the Maliss deck does summon multiple times from the extra deck, and Extra Net is an easy card to be utilizing against the Maliss matchup. But if you're in game 3 and time is about to be called, you can always utilize the continuous spell Soul Absorption, because every time a card is banished, you will gain 500 life points. So not only will your opponent have to be paying cards to summon out their Cyberse Maliss monsters, but you will be gaining life points every time a card is banished. So that difference between you and your opponent's life points will widen every time they make a play. And now Spellbound is another card you can utilize against Maliss, and that is because once it is activated, all monsters your opponent controls cannot be used as materials for any sort of summoning, including links. So you set up your board, set the Spellbound, and then flip it once they have a board full of monsters, and your opponent will be shut out of the extra deck right then and there, and this will normally lead to an early GG. But wrapping up the floodgates, we have to mention some monsters that will prevent your opponent from summoning outright, and the first one is Consecrated Light. And that is because Consecrated Light prevents your opponent from normal or special summoning dark monsters, or declaring an attack with a dark monster. So summoning Consecrated Light will lock the opponent out of summons right off the rip. But if you are a Tenpai player, then you should note that your Kokimeru Dragos will be as effective as the Consecrated Light against the Maliss matchup. But let's get to the part of the video that all the players want to see, and that is hand traps. And now, while Lancia and Chaos Hunter are obviously the most important hand traps against the Maliss deck, which is why we mentioned them first, but one of the best hand traps to utilize against Maliss is none other than Nibiru the Primal Being. And as mentioned earlier, Maliss will summon many times during their turn, far more than 5. So that being said, Nibiru the Primal Being is an easy go-to against this Maliss deck, and one that will surely change the momentum of the duel if used. And now this is the new age of Yu-Gi-Oh, so we do have to mention the Mulcharmy package. And now I know we do have Mulcharmy Perulia, and that can potentially net us a draw or two, but the Mulcharmy that will definitely be putting in work as of now is the Mulcharmy Fualos. But I want to note that once Supreme Darkness is released to the TCG, we will see the inclusion of Mulcharmy Nihilus. Because once the Nihilus is released, the Maliss deck will be fearing it, because anytime they special summon from the banished zone, the opponent will draw a card. But even if you don't have Mulcharmies yet, there is still another hand trap you can utilize to draw cards, and that is Fantastical Dragon Phantasme. And again, since your opponent is playing a Hyper Link Summon deck, having the Fantastical Dragon is easy access to draws, as well as replenishing all sorts of the combos in your hand. But we cannot forget that the dragon does serve as a little bit of protection when your opponent does try to target your cards. And as we note, the Maliss deck does do a little bit of that, so the Fantastical Dragon's effect will be putting in some work against that matchup. And now we can try Ash Blossom and Joy Spring as well as Dominus Purge against the deck. And yes, there are a few times that these cards can be utilized against things like the Signet Mining. I do recommend other options against the deck, such as Dominus Impulse, because you will have a lot more interruption with this card against that deck, considering that all their cards special summon even when they're banished. And even cards like Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit can be utilized as well. Yes, they're amazing against Yugioh, but they can still be detrimental against Maliss. So rather you remove the high link monsters off the board or prevent them from going into them by spot removing the small monsters, Ghost Ogre is definitely a card to consider as well. But that brings us to our tried and trues, and that is Ghost Mourner and Moonlit Chill, Infinite Impermanence, as well as Effect Failure. And now, all of these are really good against the Maliss matchup. Pretty much every single one of their monsters does activate an effect when it's summoned, and some of them even banish other Malisses directly from the deck. So being able to prevent these effects from going off, or even preventing some of their Link Monsters effects from going off, is never the bad targets. And the last hand trap to mention is one that can prevent your opponent from playing at all, and that is no material. And that is because if your opponent special summons a monster while you control no cards, you can discard this card, target one face-up monster your opponent controls, and then this turn, much like Spellbound, that monster cannot be used for any material at all. But we know in some duels Maliss will be going first, so we need board breakers. And now potentially the best board breaker of the format is Book of Eclipse. And that is because Book of Eclipse will flip all your opponent's monsters into face down defense position, and as we know, if they're face down, they can't be linked away. So Book of Eclipse is utilized not only against Maliss, but Yugioh as well, and that is why Book of Eclipse is one of the mainstays in many players' side decks, whether they're going first, going second, and it really doesn't matter what deck they're facing. So Book of Eclipse is one of the go-tos that you should consider against the Maliss meta. But since they're all darks and they summon to the board, the next card is an easy choice, and that is Super Polymerization. And again, since they are all dark creatures, we are easily able to super poly their board into a Starving Venom Fusion Dragon. So not only can you spot remove off the board, take out their boss monsters, or even utilize this whether you go first or second, it doesn't matter. Super Poly is an amazing card against Maliss. But the next card is potentially the go-to, and that is Evenly Matched. And now I know it might sound ironic, they like to be banished, but Evenly Match banishes things face down. But not only that, but when the Maliss Dormouse is pointed to by a Maliss Link monster, it prevents them from being destroyed by card effects. So no Raigeki and no Lightning Storm. And that is another reason why Evenly Match is mentioned against how to beat Maliss. And now while these might not be board breakers, these get your combo through, and let's roll them. We have Crossout Designator against this deck, and again, an amazing card because we see Maliss plays all sorts of hand traps, and that brings us right over to Called by the Grave. When you mention Crossout Designator, you have to mention Called by the Grave, and again, with the hand traps floating around the way they are this format, both are staples. Then, much like our other videos, since your opponent is activating monster effects constantly, even during your turn, we have cards like Triple Tactics Talent or Triple Tactics Thrust that are both putting in work against the Maliss deck. We do have the Thrust being able to add the consistency to whatever deck you're playing, as well as add some of the outs to the Maliss deck, like Artifact Sanctum, which can search the Lancia and then shut your opponent out of banishing anything during the following turn. So whether it's Lancia, Chaos Hunter, Consecrated Light, or even Super Polymerization, definitely utilize these cards against your next Maliss matchup. And if I missed anything, definitely comment that down below. And if you want to know how to beat the Yugioh matchup, definitely click the video flashing up above. But most importantly, guys, stay safe, have a good night, and suck it, nerds.